Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first fall session of the Center for Ethics and Human Values CARE, Conversations about Research Ethics panel. The CARE program aims to support Ohio State's shared values in the domain of research by building community around discussions of research integrity. And we're trying to be complementary to compliance-focused trainings, and we hope these panels are really just the beginning of the discussion to encourage exploration and further conversation and networking about cutting-edge issues in the evolving field of research ethics. I'm Dana Howard, and I'm the coordinator of the series. I'm an assistant professor in the Center for Bioethics and in the College of Medicine, and also in the philosophy department in the College of Arts and Sciences. Welcome, everyone. And the CARE program is presented with support from UMC Center for Bioethics, as well as the Clinical and Translational Science Institute. And we are so happy to have you. We're also really happy to have our panelists today. And we're going to be talking about the ethics of xenotransplantation research. So there's been so much discussion recently about the possibility and the promise of xenotransplantation, that is, using non-human organs or cells to be transplanted into humans for human benefit. It's really exciting given especially the shortage of organ donors that we have and the amount of people that are just waiting on lists. But there are so many novel ethical issues that are related to the practice. And today the hope is to talk about, given all these important ethical issues related to xenotransplantation, how should we go about thinking about the ethical aspects of researching this novel intervention? And I'm so delighted to have two external speakers and one OSU panelist, all with distinctive expertise in the field. We have Dr. Luz Padilla, who is Associate Professor of Epidemiology and Vice Chair of the IRB at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Also is the Director of Surgical Research at the Joseph S. Bruno Pediatric Heart Center. We also have Dr. Daniel Hurst, who's an Associate Professor and Director of Medical Professionalism in Professionalism, Ethics, and Humanities at Rowan-Virtua School of Osteopathic Medicine. And we have our very own Dr. Martin Fitzgerald, who's an assistant professor in bioethics. As some of you who have been to panels before, what we're going to do is we're going to start with introductory remarks from Dr. Luz Padilla and Dr. Daniel Hurst and Dr. Marty Fitzgerald. I came up with some questions because I find this topic fascinating, but I know that many of you in the audience also have a lot of questions. So I encourage you throughout the whole session to look down at the Q&A little icon. Feel free to ask questions throughout the session, and we will definitely have a lot of time for Q&A the second half of the panel. So to no further ado, why don't I let Luz start us off with your own thinking about this difficult issue.
Yeah, so first, thank you everyone for coming to this chat and for having me and the invitation. So how I came about being interested in this topic, as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Surgical Research for the Pediatric Congenital Heart Center at our hospital. And in this role, I help do research that improves the outcomes of babies with congenital heart disease. Some of these babies need a heart. And unfortunately, children under the age of 5 bear the highest waitlist mortality of any age group or organ. As you can imagine, in order for a heart to be available for this baby, another baby of similar age needs to be a donor, and that does not happen very often. To make matters worse, they do not have many options for children with end-stage heart failure to keep them alive long enough in order to receive a heart and bear the waitlist. And so our center became passionate about searching for ways to solve this issue of organ shortage instead of just letting them dwindle on the floor with nothing else to offer them. And so xenotransplantation became an interest of us. So we started to do in vitro immunologic studies. So we mixed pig blood with infant blood in a petri dish to see, the development of anti-pig antibodies. And then we also jumped into preclinical animal experiments. But as I started immersing myself in this field, I noticed that regulatory bodies like the WHO and the AXA and the FDA had set forth recommended guidelines before xenotransplantation could become a reality. One of them was public assessments. It would not matter to have an animal organ on the shelf if people just weren't open to accepting them, or if the acceptance was only limited to some groups. So interestingly, when I was looking into the background, I discovered that Canada and Australia had done some public assessments before. And, as an epidemiologist or in public health, you always think that education is sometimes a solution. But Canada's study showed that actually more education resulted in lower acceptance of the public. And in Australia, it was just a non-acceptance and resulted in a complete moratorium of advancing the science. So I became interested in this field to understand the public perspective of in the United States and how we can ethically advance this science here. I guess there are many challenges, as you mentioned. So just for the nuance, I'm going to speak, I think, to the thorniest challenges of the ethics of doing xenotransplantation right now and not of its clinical application later. So first, we've done a couple of brain dead models. At UAB, it's known as the Parsons model. And if you think about the research continuum for approving a drug or a device, you don't normally see the continuum go preclinical, then brain dead, then phase 1 clinical trial. And there's reasons for that. Unfortunately, in this case, or fortunately, we did do those models, but a whole lot of ethical challenges arose where how long was it ethical to keep this patient alive? Did the information they actually provide these brain dead models prove worth it? A paper by David Cooper, a renowned person or recognized person in xenotransplantation, challenged the use of a brain dead model because it did produce mixed results. As there were some pig kidneys that were inserted in these models that did not work. And even if they are brain dead and they are human, the generalizability is still limited to a living human who does not have that neurologic state. Another thorny challenge in terms of the current researching this is, we're also providing these under compassionate use approval. And yes, these are individuals who have exhausted all other clinical options, but we still don't know what a xenograft would offer them. Is it better than palliative care? And it's also important to think about that we are using this as a compassionate use, but there are biases that we are not only using this as a compassionate use or a novel approach to give them a further opportunity in life, but we are also using it to gather more data in order to advance the science. Another thing, I am in the pediatric realm, so I'm biased. When do we decide to do this in children? In some organs, justifying clinical trials in adults over children is not ethical. For example, in the heart realm, adults with heart failure have mechanical circulatory devices, LVADs, that can offer them a good option where justifying clinical trials comparing LVADs or mechanical circulatory support versus a xenograft with unknown longevity may not be justified. However, in children, there could be justification. And lastly, I think that the biggest one that I'm going to talk about, and I'll hand it to Daniel, is the risk of xenozoonosis, right? The risk that the animal organ can transmit an illness, a porcine illness that can infect the host and then potentially others, which could create a novel illness that humans previously don't have. And right now we're a little skittish with pandemics, right? And so it could also create a pandemic. So I think emphasizes public assessment, which should the public decide, because they are a bystander risk, when should we implement or start clinical options in this, and at what social circle do you stop consenting or telling them yes, we have your approval to implement this, and then surveillance. But I'll let Daniel speak to how he became interested in what ticks him off in terms of the ethics.
Thanks, Luce. And Dana, thanks for the invite to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I came to xenotransplantation when I was at University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB, with Luce. I was there from 2017 to 19, and then came up to New Jersey to the medical school that I'm currently on faculty at. So Luce and I worked together from about 2019 till I left at the end of 2019. We did a lot of public assessment studies, and we've obviously published a lot since then. And so she's been a great collaborator. So it's really a joy to be on this panel together. So what are the thorny issues that I see? So I was at this meeting, the International Xenotransplantation Association, last October, and David Cooper, who's a mentor of mine that Luce talked about, he was there also. And we were talking with other investigators in the xeno space about, like, what do they think are the big ethics issues? And we ended up writing a paper on that after the conference. And so that came out early part of this year. It's open access in the journal Xenotransplantation, so anyone can find it. But we termed it something like Pressing Ethical Issues Related to Pig Organ Transplantation. And many of the things that Luce just mentioned, we talked about in that paper. So patient selection criteria, right? Do we begin in the cardiac realm, do we begin with adults or do we begin with children? Or do we do both of those populations maybe simultaneously? And so we, if you've been keeping up with the literature, there's been 2 adult cardiac xenotransplantations in the US. And both of those had pretty poor outcomes. Neither lived longer than about 8 weeks or so. And as Luce is saying, there's some pretty convincing, I think, data out there that says, hey, we should probably try this in kids before adults. The rub is that most of the ethics guidelines that you look at say that any sort of novel experimental therapy has to be first trialed in adults before you move it into a vulnerable population like kids. But when we have a pediatric population that suffers from such high morbidity and mortality, and they don't have good mechanical options, then maybe this would be an ethical solution for them. Luce and I have written on that in a number of different places, and we're happy to talk about that at further length later in the session. But participant selection, pediatrics versus adults, but even in adults, right? We can think about who is the best patient for these initial clinical trials. So Mr. David Bennett was a patient at the University of Maryland who received the first pig heart a couple years ago. And he had actually been on the allo transplant waitlist, but was turned down for a heart because he was non-compliant with past medical treatment. And so for those who don't know, non-compliance is a red flag to transplant organizations. Transplants, right? Organs are a scarce resource, and you really need to be careful about post-transplant, staying on immunosuppressants, going to your follow-up appointments, those sorts of things. Well, Mr. Bennett had proven himself, at least in some people's eyes, to be non-compliant at some point in his prior medical treatment. And so when we think about xenotransplantation, and we'll get into this probably a lot in this session, then we think about this risk of zoonotic infection, all right, or xenozoonotic infection, all right. So a zoonosis is any sort of microorganism that's transmitted from the animal to the human, becomes pathogenic in the human, all right. And so we've known that it's a known possibility that some sort of microorganism can be transmitted, possibly from the pig organ to the human, and then plausibly to other people, right? Creates a public health instance, right? That could be via airborne infection, could be via sexual transmission. We don't know. These are all just kind of hypotheticals, but they are possibilities at this point. And so many people have said, well, because of that possibility, then we need to biosurveil you, all right? We need you to submit to biosurveillance, some sort of lifelong monitoring mechanism for the remainder of your life, right? So that may include imaging. It may include graft biopsies, blood draws, right, at regular intervals for the rest of your life. All right, that's pretty onerous on the patient, right? So let's go back to Mr. Bennett. All right, we're saying that Mr. Bennett, who was non-compliant to prior medical advice, is now okay to be offered a pig transplant when there's all these things post-transplant that he's going to also have to submit to. And so, right, that's a question of patient selection criteria. Should Mr. Bennett have been offered a pig heart, right? Many people say no. The Maryland group said yes. Right, and so all those issues play into this, right? Lifelong surveillance, who should be a good patient to receive a pig heart, all that plays into that. One thing, and then we can move on a little bit, but just kind of prime the pump here. You know, there's so many ethical issues. I think one thing that Luce and I have recently started talking about that really I don't know that many people are talking about at all is, let's say clinical trials go forth, right? Xenotransplantation proves itself to be a safe, even effective clinical option. It goes into clinical therapy. How should we allocate these organs? Right, we know about the current organ allocation system, right? The UNOS, those criteria, et cetera. But in a world where we both have allotransplantation, right, human-to-human transplants, and xenotransplantation, does the patient get to decide if they want a genetically modified pig versus a human? How is that worked out, right? And so that's an issue that this is not going to be worked out, I think, probably for years, maybe even decades into the future. Once we start gathering some of that data, assuming that this goes into clinical therapy, gathering some of that data on how well these organs actually work when compared to their allo counterparts. So Dana, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you so much. Such fascinating issues and really interesting ways in which some of the novelty of xenotransplantation actually is asking some of these foundational questions that are always at the heart of a lot of the ethical considerations related to research ethics. Marty, would you like to go next to sort of bring about your own expertise and how you've been thinking about some of the challenges and the issues?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm happy to be on this panel. My own road to xenotransplantation is through something that, on one hand, is nearly synonymous, but is conceptually, I think, a different pathway, which is I'm interested in the ethics surrounding human-animal chimerism in general. So for those in the audience, a chimera is a biological term just meaning any organism that has at least two populations of cells within it that have different genotypes. So a chimera could be from the same species, it could be from different species, or what have you. Now, the terms arguably you cannot create a human-animal chimera except through xenotransplantation, depending upon how you want to phrase it. Although I think for the purpose of this panel, often xenotransplantation is usually phrased as a therapeutic procedure for human patients, although depending upon where the terms used, it might be a little different. So I'm interested in that broader category. And I'm interested in a number of different ways, one of which is that, you know, the default human-animal chimera is an organism that started as an animal and then was given additional human genetic material. And what do we think about the ethics surrounding that? And I'm particularly interested in what's actually different in these cases. One of the things that stands out to me about human-animal chimerism and xenotransplantation is that it invokes from both professionals and the lay public really weird arguments. People will say things about how it violates human dignity such that we might even undo the very foundations of human society by creating creatures that have these mixed cellular populations, or that this in some way represents us playing God or rebelling against what's proper for us in this world and so on. And whatever you think of those things, they're at least strange. I mean, they at least aren't usually found. So my other two panelists here have talked about the question of prioritization of people on organ transplantation lists. The arguments people make about those things when it's a porcine heart involved are really different than just prioritization other ways. No one's saying that we're going to undo society by how we rank people to receive hearts, although obviously it's still an ethically relevant question. So I'm really interested in why those things are so weird, but then also I'm interested in trying to make sure that the animals involved in these procedures, their interests also have a seat at the table, where especially in the case where we're doing some of the most recent porcine transplantations, the correspondence is pretty one-to-one. I can point to, it's no longer the nebulous, we researched on some animals, but in fact, I can point to the one involved here as well. So I guess in summary, I'm really interested in this problem because there's a lot that's actually just the same. There's a lot that I actually think doesn't pose novel questions whatsoever. And there are a lot of things that people think are radically novel, and there are some things that in some cases I think are truly novel. But I think that's all I have my means of introduction. I'm really interested in hearing what other people are going to ask, and I'd be happy to answer alongside the other panelists.
Thank you. I mean, that's awesome. So, I mean, I do see some themes sort of emerging about really thinking and examining what is novel about potentially xenotransplantation as a practice or an intervention, and then how does that translate into whether or not there are any new novel questions for the research or the development of that. And so, yes, let's jump right in and sort of jumping off of something that Marty just said at the end about thinking about the animals having a say, or sort of thinking about their sort of ethical status when it comes to this kind of research. I would love to hear from you. I mean, in some ways, this is a very general question, but it is this sort of weird thing where it's not just like, oh, we did the animal models, and now we're doing the like first in human trials. There's like literally an animal and human involved. So should we think of xenotransplantation as non-human animal research along with human animal research? Can we understand xenotransplantation research through the sort of regulatory sort of infrastructure of human subjects research in the way in which we've been thought to do that? And maybe Daniel, maybe we'll start with you, and then if anyone else wants to join in.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So yeah, how do I think about kind of the non-human animals that are involved in this research, right? Where I fall is that xenotransplantation to me is a non-ideal solution to the organ shortage that we have. Non-ideal. Here's what I mean, right? The issue is regarding using animals in this manner, right? Using them instrumentally for human advancement, human flourishing, right? Some will accept that. The empirical data that Luce and I have gathered show that even a majority of the population will accept that. But that doesn't mean they accept it without reservations, right? People have hesitations, even if they are more pro using the pig for human organs. And so we have that set of people, right? We also have people on the other side of the spectrum who are just completely against using animals instrumentally for human flourishing. I don't agree with those people. I respect their opinions, right? They're consistent in their viewpoints. But I think, like I said, I think xenotransplantation is a non-ideal solution to the organ shortage problem. What's an ideal solution? Ideal solution is something to the effect of probably 3D printing, but we're not there yet. The technology is just simply not caught up with that at this point. And xenotransplantation is the most advanced that we have to date. And so continuing with xenotransplantation, but also not discontinuing other forms of potential alternatives to allotransplantation and to xenotransplantation, like 3D printing, like other things. There's been a lot about trying to the opt-out system that certain countries have. All right, so in the U.S., then we have an opt-in system, right? You have to opt in to be an organ donor, right? Maybe you do that at the DMV when you get a new driver's license, right? You sign the back of your card, whatever, right? But you actually have to say, yes, I want to be an organ donor in this country. Now, some countries have gone to an opt-out model. Spain is kind of the gold standard for that. But there's mixed results on whether or not that actually contributes at the end of the day to more organs being available for transplant. And so there's been a lot of policy proposals. So I don't think that we should, say, hey, let's not go those routes also. But I think xenotransplantation should be put forward alongside continuing with other models of organ alternatives that don't raise some of these thorny issues. Because the animal issue, even though I'm pro xenotransplantation, it's still a thorny issue. We've been thinking about kind of solid organ transplantation, right? Transplants of kidneys and hearts and livers and those sorts of things as maybe like a 1-to-1, right? One pig to one human, right? Maybe that's the case, maybe, but xenotransplantation is not only about solid organs, right? It's also about the transplantation of cells and tissues. Let's think about xenotransplantation of genetically modified porcine pancreatic islet cells for type 1 diabetics. All right, so that's being trialed in some countries, not in the US that I know of, but outside the US. The current literature says that it's these neonatal pigs, all right, somewhere between like 12 or 14 days to about 12 weeks of age, all right? Those are the best pigs to use for pancreatic islet cells. The current research says that in order to have enough of those pancreatic islet cells for one adult patient, about 70 kilograms, you need about 25 piglets. Somewhere on that order. That's the number that David Cooper has offered in a recent paper. I've seen some estimates go up to 70, even 100. And so now it's no longer a 1-to-1, right? One pig heart to one human. It's now, on order of 25 plus piglets to one human for type 1 diabetes. So those are kind of the issues that I'm toying with my head, right? It's a non-ideal solution. I think we have to advance other things at the same time. Luce, I'll give it over to you.
Sure. Yeah, I think that xenotransplantation does place us at an intersection of human and non-human concerns. When considering how we think about non-human subjects involved, we must really acknowledge that their use in research raises ethical questions similar to those to human subjects research. And similar to human subjects research, we should really care about conducting research in animals with the highest ethical standards and care for their welfare and well-being, as we remind and have growing recognition that animals have sentience. But having conducted preclinical, it sometimes centers, it's similar to like the Belmont report with human subjects research. Animal studies have those 3 R's, right? The replacement, reduction, and refinement. And as Daniel said, there are other options out there. And so we are trying to pursue replacement, but xenotransplantation is the one that's offering us the highest potential right now. But let's pretend that that's the one that continues to be the running head. Once it's into production, can pharmaceutical companies or whoever's going to produce this pig model really assure us reduction and refinement? So reducing the number of pigs used and refining, which means, preventing pain and distress in the animal. And the things that Marty said were really interesting to me, because some of our focus groups, individuals, said, I kind of struggle with using the animal, but I don't feel the same guilt when I eat bacon or meat on a daily basis. And so I'm kind of confused right now on how I don't feel guilt consuming this on a daily basis, but I'm kind of having guilt right now about thinking about using an animal for human survival and such. And so I think it's realistic to say that at first we will not meet the reduction and refinement. We will use entire pigs to just harvest one organ. And so what are we going to do with the rest of the pig? And how many pigs are going to be needed? Because some of these pigs with genetic modifications and litters are born with such genetic defects that are deemed non-usable. So there is not all litter produces 100% yield for all organ. There will be discard. So we will probably infringe on reduction. And then obviously refinement, there needs to be models that need to be. And then if we talk about discard, that advances us to environmental impact, not only animal stewardship. So I think it's having better plans for reduction and refinement are definitely needed in order to move forward with xenotransplantation ethically.
Great. I'll just say very briefly. I'm interested, Luz. I'm glad you brought up the question of agriculture and animal use in agriculture. I mentioned the theme of sometimes things aren't as novel as you seem. I mean, animal research use is embedded within a larger context of animal use in other domains, right? I'm not going to give an overall statement about the permissibility or impermissibility of animal research, although I guess if an audience member presses me, sure. But I'll say at least some of the xenotransplantation seems to be the least problematic in the sense that I think bookline medical research using animal models is probably much more speculative in terms of probable benefit than xenotransplantation. And I'm also interested, you mentioned the question of welfare concern. I'm working on a book right now about the welfare concerns and the question of how you might assess animal welfare for human-animal chimeras, where for some of them, probably not problematic, but for other ones, especially that start to, say, use neural organoid transplantation and so on, my claim is you might actually lose nearly all ability to assess welfare at that moment. So those are other considerations to throw in, but I'm guessing Dana's about to give us a question from the audience in just a second here. So.
Well, there's a lot of questions that hopefully the audience can see as well. I'm going to ask some further questions before we get to the audience. But one thing that one audience member, I think, nicely highlighted was, I mean, in some ways, this question about how should we think about it is not regulatory. I mean, there are regulatory ways in which this kind of research is taking place institutionally and in the United States and internationally. So an anonymous attendee said it would not be animal research overseen by IACUC because the animal is deceased. So the actual transplantation. So and then it could be human subjects research if the transplant is for research purposes. Otherwise, it's not human subjects research. Luz, can I just get your position on just sort of thinking about that regulatory?
Yeah, the animal is not deceased as a donor. The animal when we conducted our pig to baboon cardiac transplants, we did have an IACUC. We had to make sure that the pig donor received appropriate care and its welfare was abided by all IACUC ethical standards for animal care, and that it was put to rest also humanely and properly. But it is alive during the donation process. So IACUC does apply for it. It wouldn't be as we carry organs similar to allotransplantation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So one thing that you've mentioned is related to this. I mean, this is just going back to the point that Daniel was making about the non-ideal nature. In some ways, this is a stopgap measure. And Luce, you also brought up this idea that like maybe in the future we will not need to use xenotransplantation, but let's imagine that this actually turns out to be the most effective way of doing it, thinking about all the considerations. And all of this is going on in an ongoing crisis of shortages in organ donation. And I mean, in particular, just like the pediatric crisis, I think is particularly interesting, thinking about a vulnerable population that is exceptionally vulnerable when it comes to having certain conditions. So does this crisis contribute to how we should think about the ethical permissibility of developing this medical intervention? If there were no such crisis, do you think this research would be ethically permissible? I would love to hear. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in first. Otherwise,
Sure.
I could call upon Luce.
Yeah. Again, I'm before saying that, I will say that pharmaceutical companies are trying to discuss the possibility of the meat from the pig for human consumption, which then can also, it has an interesting take for agriculture and that industry. But in terms of crisis and permissibility, does that justify some of the ethic barriers that we're facing? Similar to Marty, I'm going to say I don't want to speak to permissibility or not, because these ethical issues would already be solved. But I think it's important to think about what we would use to define a crisis, right? Sometimes we use mortality, morbidity, cost. Healthcare today has become ambitious, and now even quality of life can label something as crisis, right? So I believe something being a crisis is not only justification for advancement and seeking survival. I think that the fact that it's currently in the organ shortage is a crisis does underscore the urgency and potential societal benefit. But despite us being in need, I think the research should still adhere to rigorous ethical standards, regardless of the context, and still weigh the cost of implementing such option. I think we do need to be mindful of the balance of the ecosystem for our survival. We are, however, an aging population, and thus put us at risk for end-stage organ issues. And then we do have a decreasing population growth, which then puts us at a decreased donor pool, which will only make the matters worse. I am a preventive person as an epidemiologist, so we shouldn't wait until something becomes a crisis in order to explore it. And important health, as I said, even quality of life sometimes justifies, people in our focus groups mentioned they would do anything to get off of dialysis. Being attached to an ECMO machine, a circulatory device, an oxygen tank, or having to live near a dialysis center and attend several times a week is just not life for some. The freedom that a solid organ would bring to live and potentially prolong their life would need to be weighed against all of the ethical issues that we're talking about right here. Animal stewardship, even religious considerations, which is a topic we haven't discussed yet. Even without the immediate pressure of organ shortage, again, I'm just an advocate that the research, I see the benefits, and I guess biasly, I support xenotransplantation, but I'm in it for doing it the right way and finding ways that we can justify through rigorous ethical standards, having scientific validity, animal stewardship, environmental awareness, and weighing the potential medical benefit compared to existing alternatives is my thought.
I'll say it's pretty clear to me that without a shortage, the research becomes less permissible. I mean, in the sense that for any given action, if you can accomplish the same thing without the loss of other life, it's clearly more permissible, right? So, that's true for organs. That's true for, name any other action, right? If you can get your car from point A to point B without hitting an animal on the road along the way, you're better off for it, right? So it's, at the very least, the shortage does change the tenor of the question, in the sense that if there weren't one, it's unclear to me that it would actually be permissible practice.
I think Luce and Marty have answered that question adequately and beautifully, so I don't really have a lot else to say to that, Dana.
All right, great. Well, let's then, Luce, you brought up sort of religious objections, and this is, I'm sort of transferring into some of the audience questions. You've done really fascinating research related to the public acceptability of this research. And I think one really important question from an attendee is using porcine organs acceptable to Jewish and Muslim groups? And sort of one follow-up question from that is, how should we think about researching an intervention? Let's say it's not acceptable, but I'm very interested to hear what you found, but if there are certain populations that don't find it acceptable, how should we think about the ethics of conducting research that may, in the long run, not be acceptable to a certain population, even if it's acceptable to a different population?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Daniel speak to Jewish and Muslims, but I will talk about a specific population. There's two studies that we've done, and they're one previously done in a smaller population of individuals on the wait list or have been transplanted, and the lay public. But then also we just did a study that surveyed across all the United States and had over 5,000 respondents. And in these two studies, we have found hesitations among Black individuals. In one of our studies, they were 6 times less likely to accept a xenograft than their white counterparts. And that's particularly troubling to me because in the kidney realm, we already see transplant disparities where more Black individuals are waitlisted and very few achieve transplant, whereas less proportion of white individuals are waitlisted, but a lot more of them actually achieve transplant. And so if we have hesitations among this group, even if we had an organ on the shelf, it's not going to address this disparity. It's only going to widen it because this group, certain groups will continue to accept, and this group will continue to fall behind. And so that's one of our, points of advocacy is that as we move forward to this, we need to be mindful of what those concerns are and sensitive to those concerns to make sure that if we do have something that's available, to not leave people behind and make sure that, they make an appropriate or have the tools that they need in order to make an appropriate risk-benefit determination for whatever their thoughts and beliefs are. And I'll let Daniel speak to our studies and what we've had so far among Muslim and Jewish groups.
Yeah, thanks, Luz. Yeah, I love the question on religious aspects. I grew up as a moral theologian before I studied philosophy and bioethics. So it's kind of been my hobby house to study viewpoints based on religion towards xenotransplantation, those sorts of things. Luz and I conducted focus groups when we were at UAB together, 2019 or so, and we had one focus group where we had different religious. We had pastors. We had from various Protestant denominations. We had a Muslim imam. We had a Jewish rabbi send in some comments. So we had a lot of different religious leaders in the room together talking about xenotransplantation. And the overall tenor, even from our Jewish representative who wasn't there in person but sent us comments, the Muslim imam who was there, the overall tenor was, if your life depends on it, then yes, you take the pig organ. And so that's surprising, right? Because in Judaism, then pork is not kosher, right? In Islam, then pork is not halal, it's not permissible. But both of those individuals and the other literature that supports this in this sphere, so descriptive literature mainly, says the same thing, that when it comes down to preserving a person's life, then other principles can be overridden. And so that's kind of the point from the religious leaders. Now, when you survey people kind of on the ground, right, the lay people who are adherents to those particular faiths, then the numbers get a little bit more nuanced, right? And so Luz alluded to this recent survey where we had 5,000 or so US participants. And I think of that, in the demographics, we had, 120 or so Muslim adherents, something like that. One surprising data point that we had from that is that most of them said, yeah, I'll take the xenograft, but I would feel much more comfortable if it came from a different animal, if it came from a dog or a cow or a goat, right? Rather than the pig, because the pig is unclean. And so this, they're really interesting data points. Can education make a difference on those areas? Jury's still out on that because there hasn't been really great educational initiatives on that. And so that's kind of the first point. The second point is we only know a little bit about religious viewpoints towards xenotransplantation. We know from a little bit of descriptive literature what religious leaders have said. We know from one focus group that we did in 2019 at UAB, and then we know from this one 5,000 person survey that wasn't necessarily about religious attitudes, but we captured that demographic, and those are recorded now. So that's pretty much the only data that we have from a US perspective. And most of those are in regards to Protestant Christians or Catholic Christians. Right? There's very little empirical data that we have from minority faith groups, from minority Protestant denominations, from Buddhists, from Hindus, from even Jewish and Muslim adherents and other faith groups, right? Sikhs, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? Mormons. Very little is known about these populations and their viewpoints. And so more work needs to be done on those issues.
So can I ask just sort of a follow-up question related to that? If there turns out to be certain minority, like faith-based objections to xenotransplantation, it's interesting to think about the poor child, like the fact that it's pork versus the potential ethical concerns related to the, as Marty, with the like uncanniness of xenotransplantation more broadly, right? So there are these ethical concerns. How should we think about, if there turns out to be certain ethical concerns that are sticky, right? That education, public communication, that doesn't really seem to translate into further approval. So perhaps in the case of Canada, that's similar to what is going on. Does that change how we should think about developing this kind of intervention? Or I'm just wondering if you think that there's really any relation between the public acceptability of a minority group versus like sort of more broad public acceptability of an intervention.
I think it's a really good question, Dana. And here's what I think. I think xenotransplantation is going to advance whether or not these minority groups accept it or not. And I don't say that lightly or to disparage minority viewpoints at all. I say that because I think Xeno is going forward. I think the science is going to go forward, and biotech companies are going to continue to research this. And so I say that, and I also say that, but I still think that we need to, like Luce was saying, with racial viewpoints, right? I think that those racial viewpoints with African Americans are super important, and we have to continue to hone in on exactly why some African Americans appear to be 6 times more hesitant or less willing, however you phrase it, to accept a xenograft than their white counterparts, right? And that's the question we don't know, is the why. We have the quantitative data, we don't know the qualitative.
Yeah, for all we know, that could just be a confounder. The race characteristic could be a confounder and not necessarily, it could be tied to other groups, and but the why that drives it, I think, is an important question to explore.
Great. So maybe some of the questions are related, I think, in the Q&A, and they're sort of thinking about these long-term sort of expectations of continuing surveillance and monitoring. So you both have written about the voluntary nature of continued participation in xenotransplantation research. That is, once signed up to participate in such research, surveillance and monitoring will be an ongoing expectation, even if the participant would like to withdraw from like it being research, right? So that their data being research. So there's been some questions in the chat about what do we mean by this? So how is this really different?
Yeah.
So Alan Litsky asks, how is this different from any transplant who's subject to lifelong monitoring for their own health? What are the additional burdens there? And then Bimal Chaudhary has asked, how is the concern of zoonotic transmission, if that's sort of the way of thinking about it, and bystander risk different from bystander risk from extensive or multiple drug resistance? We don't generally seek community approval to study different antibiotic regimens. So it seems to me like all of these are in the same category of question about how is this really any different from the ethical issues that come up more broadly with transplantation and also with this kind of research.
Daniel, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
I can answer Alan's question if you want to answer the multi-drug resistance, if you can, if that's okay. So, right, I think we have to keep in mind that this is in the context of a clinical trial, right? This isn't clinical therapy at this point. And since Nuremberg, we can go back that far to post-World War II, then any research participant should have the recourse to withdraw completely from a clinical trial at any time for any reason. I mean, that's standard boilerplate language in any informed consent protocol, any informed consent form. It's in, it's in Nuremberg, it's in Declaration of Helsinki, it's in, Belmont. I mean, you would be hard pressed to find that, not find that in research ethics guidelines nowadays, right? I mean, this is standard stuff. And so now we're saying that in the context of a xenotransplantation clinical trial, every other clinical trial out there, the research participant can withdraw at any point for any reason. But now we're saying that this person who has received a xenograft, that there is one part of this clinical trial, the biosurveillance, that person can no longer say, hey, I don't want any part of it. All right, I withdraw, right? Even to the point of if that graft is excised, we take it out of your body, then you still can't withdraw from biosurveillance. And so there's always going to be a part of the clinical trial that you can never withdraw from completely. And so that's the crucial difference, I think, with xenotransplantation in the context of a clinical trial.
Yeah, I think that as Daniel said, it's important that we have too many unknowns, right? This is not in the clinical practice. This is in exploring the initiation of clinical trials. And so people will, yes, we will, the expectation, to answer one of the questions, the expectation is to monitor someone similar to allotransplantation, the same schedule for biopsy, the same schedule for monitoring for rejection, the same. But as we initiate this, because there is a risk of xenozoonosis, because there are so many unknowns, it is undeniable that we will monitor this person closely and that they'll undergo additional medical procedures and blood tests and scans and biopsies as we understand this than your average allotransplantation surveillance. And so the problem is we don't know what that schedule is going to look like. So then when you tie that back into informed consent is supposed to tell people all that they're going to undergo in order for them to understand the risk-benefit ratio. However, you don't know that here. And then you also don't know that if there is a risk of xenozoonosis, then we have to undergo, you would have to undergo quarantining, and that could extend to your loved ones. So again, there is that burden of lifelong participation however, some people in the literature have challenged that realistically, pharmaceutical companies or whoever is going to be in charge of biosurveillance or in phase 4 post-monitoring surveillance, who's going to be in charge of actually conducting this surveillance, and that whoever is doing that will ultimately have finite resources. There will be loss to follow up. There will be not enough money for following outside of the allotransplant monitoring, and that eventually that will become the norm. But until we subside our concerns with xenotransplantation and that biosurveillance, we will deviate from the allotransplantation surveillance, but we still don't know what that schedule looks like. We've already adjusted our scheduling surveillance just based on Mr. Bennett's experience in the development of porcine CMV, or I guess the isolation of porcine CMV in his tissue, right? And develop different assays and a different assay time point assessment, and that's just an N of 1. So I think it has a lot of challenges in terms of the consent process. And it's unrealistic to know that they will follow the same continuum of allotransplantation for a long time.
I want to add something to this as well. I mean, I think Daniel and Luce have said this, give us something really interesting here. But I think that another concern also is the question of withdrawal. I'm not actually convinced that's the right way to pitch the question of health surveillance, because it's actually strikes me that what's going on is not fundamentally a research question. I mean, there's a research aspect to it, but I think the relevant question is no longer withdrawal, not withdrawal. The relevant question seems to me a public health imperative versus a health privacy and health autonomy imperative, because you actually could withdraw. Health surveillance need not be to a research end. You could just say, we're not collecting data on this anymore. We're just making sure you don't have this, right? So that doesn't mean that therefore it's okay to sign someone up for something where they might be bound into lifelong health surveillance. But it strikes me that that's actually no longer the relevant question at that point. It seems to be a public health imperative thing at that point.
Yeah, and CDC guidelines do say that when the public is at risk, it actually takes away the individual's risk. And so, you know, we could enforce quarantine, and we could enforce if any risk to the public exists over the rights of the individual.
And so, Lewis, you sort of started talking about informed consent. Informed consent also has come up in the Q&A. So Anthony Dent has asked, what concerns do you have via the informed consent of patients or family members of the research involving xenotransplantation? There is this sort of concern about future surveillance. Are there any other issues related to informed consent in xenotransplantation research?
Yeah. I mean, xenotransplantation poses an ethical challenge to all 9 elements required in the informed consent set forth from the Department of Human Health Services and the Code of Federal Regulations, right? We don't know the risks. We're not clear about the benefits. It has to some extent questionable voluntarism because you are at an interesting crossroad of a need. And then as we've discussed, the ability to withdraw. It also, you know, what is if the forced quarantine, you can't appropriately describe all the procedures in order to make a risk-benefit determination. There's also the not being able to reproduce. We don't understand the risk for reproduction because of possible risk to the subject or of the fetus. So beyond the lifelong participation, the infectious risk in xenozoonosis, the penalty for non-compliance, even if you are in a xenotransplantation, and even if the model for genes in this pig do have some gene knockouts to decrease rejection, you will still need immunosuppression therapy, which that is a different in itself. We're still exploring which immunosuppressive regimen will be appropriate for this. And so you can't really appropriately describe all the procedures. You're basically signing a, yes, I accept the xenograft within whatever that will entail. And so, you know, there's been the talk of a Ulysses contract, right, where you can't withdraw, and it used in psychiatry studies where because of potential mental impairments, but, you know, that has been contested in the use of xenotransplantation because we are pushing back on taking away so many rights or questioning the rights of a potential research participant in terms of consent and the challenges that xenotransplantation poses for that. And then, of course, you know, what about children? If I'm talking about kids with congenital heart disease and we're putting these hearts in these babies under the age of 1 who were born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, when do we ask them to reconsent? Of course, we don't know how long an allograft will work, but say a cardiac, xenograft will work for a long time, or if it's used as a bridge, you know, if this is a teenager or an adolescent, we already have non-compliance issues with adolescents and teenagers who stop taking their medications because they don't want to be a human heart recipient. I can only imagine what they would think if they were, or how they would behave if they were faced with the crossroad of having a pig organ in their body. One of our studies showed that parents' highest concern with kids accepting, although they would do anything for their child to survive, one of their top concerns are the psychosocial negative effects that it could have on their child.
Any other thoughts related to informed consent?
To kind of hit on what Luce said there at the end about, you know, parents and their viewpoints of the child receiving a xenograft, right? I mean, and so Luce is alluding to these focus groups that we did, where parents said, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what religion I am. It doesn't matter what I may think about my child receiving a xenograft. If it's going to save their life, that's what I'm going to choose. And so that's their number one concern. But a close secondary concern, like Luce is saying, are these psychosocial elements, not only voiced by parents, but other stakeholders in our focus group said, hey, it seems to us that this is a potential for bullying, right? That these kids are going to be made fun of by their peers in elementary school when they find out that, hey, you know, Johnny has a pig heart, right? And so oink, oink, you know, they call him a pig, right? Pig's a dirty word in our culture, right? And so these sorts of psychosocial issues, all conjecture at this point, but it points to the need that these are going to continue to need to be studied well into the future in order to have interventions posed for them.
So multiple iterations of informed consent we believe will be needed.
So one question that came up, super interesting question from the audience, from Richard Gibson, is concerns related to xenotransplantation tourism. So this is clearly potentially a concern for the practice of xenotransplantation in the future, but it may also be a concern related to governance issues of current research. So Richard asks, if one jurisdiction places too extreme or too lax limitations on xenotransplantation research implementation, might we start to see travel by those seeking organs? How would this fit into the discussion of global resource distribution justice?
I can take that one. Hey, Richard. Richard's a friend. So thanks for the question, man. So it's a really fascinating question, right? I mean, organ tourism is a huge problem globally. When we think about xenotourism, then right in a more ideal state, Xeno is not an ideal solution. That's my position. In a more ideal state, xenotransplantation is not a scarce resource like an allotransplantation is necessarily in a country that has the facilities, the logistics, all that worked out, right? Someplace like the US or the UK or Germany, right? These countries that are working towards that. And so is it an ethical problem for somebody from a low resource country to travel to the US, let's say, and receive a xenotransplant? I don't think it's as big of a deal as them coming to the US or some other place and receiving a scarce resource, because xenotransplantation wouldn't be a scarce resource. So are they taking it away from someone else at that point? So those are just some of my kind of off the cuff comments. Loose.
I'd like to note that just because we're going to have or will potentially have a organ on the shelf shouldn't mean that we also don't have expectations for the recipient.
Yeah.
Because the discussion of abuse of an infinite resource has come up. And so there will still be some restrictions. And I just want to make sure that just because we have an organ on the shelf, we're going to give it to anyone, regardless of their personal choices of non-compliance or abuse of that organ, because we still also need to be mindful of animal stewardship.
Yes,
I believe so. So just to be clear, and then in terms of tourism, I think that I don't think we need to even think internationally. I think as we implement this, we're going to see that there are going to be certain major centers that actually host this technology at first. And I anticipate that there will be some population shifts towards those centers and try to seek and get closer to them. And these centers are, we are seeing the positioning and geographical positioning strategically of these farms that are going to produce, or these bio farms that are going to be producing the supply, and they're strategically placed near these centers. And I anticipate there being a shift, and the people who can afford the shift will be the people who may benefit or not from the from this technology, since we still do not know the outcomes of it. But they will have access to it first, of course, and that does place questions of social justice and equity of resources.
The other one there worth considering is, and I'll have to defer about the probability of this, but if health surveillance is an indicated aspect of receiving xenotransplantation, that obviously goes out the window if you're traveling clandestinely to receive xenotransplantation in another country. Again, I can't speak to whether or not that is a pressing concern we must account for, but given the current regime of health surveillance, obviously that's problematic currently.
So one thing to bring up, and I believe that was all the questions from participants in the audience. So if you have other questions, we still have about 10 minutes, so feel free to ask more questions. But one thing to bring up is the fact that currently the people who have been receiving or been participating in xenotransplantation research are not the people who have the resources, right? So, I mean, this has been talked about before, but, you know, in some ways, it's like the people who are currently candidates for xenotransplantation research are people who cannot receive or have tried to receive allotransplantation and are not candidates for that, sometimes due to historical issues related to whether or not they were compliant with past medical care. We know that there's so many socioeconomic and racist, like because of medical racism, there's all these issues about who gets to count as non-compliant, who's seen as non-compliant and who isn't, what goes on in the electronic health records, and so forth. So how should we think about, so that's one case of the sort of adult participants. The other case is young babies, where there really isn't a technological alternative or a viable donor alternative. So these are, in some ways, the participants are, they don't have very many options, right? So how should we think about the voluntariness of this kind of research related to the potential vulnerabilities that a lot of the people that would be good candidates for research, how should we think about their vulnerability when we come to assessing the ethics of this research?
I think it's I think it's a fascinating question, right? The issue of voluntariness in a vulnerable population, right? And I think anyone, regardless of adult or pediatrics, they're a vulnerable population because they're in need of a transplant. And so when I think about this, I think about it in kind of three categories, right? We could think about coercion. Coercion usually includes a threat of harm. And so I don't think that that quite fits. We could think about exploitation. Alan Wertheimer, political philosopher, kind of simple definition of exploitation is that A exploits B when A takes unfair advantage of B. That maybe gets a little bit closer. But what I think that, and Luz can probably talk about this more than me, since she's our IRB person really, is undue influence or undue inducement. And that's this sort of a little nebulous idea of how much are we unduly influencing a person to participate in this research study, right? Oftentimes we think about this from an IRB perspective in terms of paying participants for a research study, right? What's the amount of money that's going to, allow this person to say, yes, I want to participate in your clinical trial, but isn't going to actually push them over the edge where it's the money that's driving it. And that's what I've been thinking about in terms of xenotransplantation is what are those factors that we can try to manipulate in order to make sure that we're not unduly influencing a person to participate in this last-ditch life-saving effort. Now, in some sense, maybe this isn't altogether different from a phase whatever clinical trial for an oncology patient who has exhausted all of their therapies and they're now at the Mayo Clinic and they have this first-in-human clinical trial, right? Last-ditch effort. We don't even know the safety of this new drug, but we're offering it to you as a last-ditch effort. That happens all the time. Is xenotransplantation that disanalogous from that? So Luz, I'll give it over to you to provide the answer.
Yeah, I think I want to speak to how attitudes and acceptance of something are fluid, and it's all about perspective, right? Our studies have shown that we've stratified the data by transplant experiences, and the more people are removed from needing an organ or having a loved one who needs an organ or being a recipient themselves, their lower their level of acceptance is, and they're higher their level of concern. So I think that when speaking with a child to a parent, of course, or a legally authorized representative who is making a secondary decision for this child, whether being a recipient, at the end of the day, they're not the one in need. And that may play, we would never be able to measure the train of thought process of all humans in terms, but I do think it's different making the decision for someone else who has a need and is your loved one and you're emotionally involved than you being at the crossroad of life or death. Not that xenotransplantation would offer you life, but of the crossroad of I've exhausted all of my options and these are my remaining alternatives. And so I think that's an important point to make, that again, attitudes are fluid and they depend on perspective in order to shape where people would stand, which may possibly shed point to what Daniel said, that Xeno may advance because of this, because you could never truly capture a train of thought, because you can never cater to acceptance and such. Which that should not be the objective. The objective is to also, identify these concerns and be sensitive to those so that to make sure that if you advance, you leave less people behind.
So we have a few minutes left, and I just want to give each of you some opportunity to say some final remarks related to some questions that we haven't brought up that you're still struggling with when it comes to some of these issues, or any other further comments or thoughts that you just want to bring up to continue the conversation after the panel is over. So maybe why don't I start with Luz, and then Marty, and then Daniel.
Sure. I think, again, as someone who's interested in this technology, as I just said, I'm interested in not leaving a group behind. If we are to advance, how do we not leave a group behind? Not by forcing them to make and see our points of view, but by being sensitive to those concerns to make sure that there are not any points that we could address for them to make an appropriate risk-benefit determination for themselves, and not leave it to whatever their thoughts may be on baseline. Does that make sense? And so because I'm looking at someone's question saying, why mistrust? Well, unfortunately or fortunately, our studies were conducted at UAB, which is located in Birmingham, Alabama, which, as you know, has a deep historical experience with mistrust because of Tuskegee and other happenings here. And so my thoughts moving forward is that we, again, need to be no matter the crisis, we still need to make sure that we justify our advancements through rigorous ethical standards, scientific validity, animal stewardship, environmental awareness, and the potential of medical benefit compared to existing alternatives. And if that's, and what that will look like while being sensitive of not leaving other people behind is kind of challenging. And as Marty said, some of the issues are novel and some of them are not, and are interesting. Why in xenotransplantation there are more, the ones that are not novel are heightened or reminded as if they were, is still whether novel or not still presents a barrier and a challenge. And so again, finding ways forward while assuring all of those realms are met, and that all stakeholders, pharmaceutical companies, organ allocation, regulatory bodies, the consumer, and the public are all on board. It seems easy for me to request, but I know it's a daunting task.
Marty?
Excellent. Yeah. Summary thoughts. So, technologies like this are embedded phenomena, right? They're ones that exist against the backdrop of a whole lot. So because of that, very often the things that are more mundane get overlooked, right? So the idea that animals involved could have welfare concerns, or the idea that socioeconomic status might have something to say about who receives things. Those are all common and mundane, but as a result, they tend to get overlooked when there are conceptually exciting issues involved, right? The idea that we're breaking down species boundaries or something like this, but we ought not to overlook them. The other thing I want to say is to the question of, one of the things that we can at least say about xenotransplantation is it's, at the cutting edge of technology, right? And that's actually a dangerous thing, not just in the sense that it can have untoward side effects, but, the current way society is set up is such that medical progress is one of the bearers of our society's hopes, right? That's one of the things that we say that what we want to do as a group of people fundamentally is make progress in this way. And so xenotransplantation carries a lot of momentum behind it. It's, sometimes the idea that what we're trying to do when we educate patients about xenotransplantation, I think the unstated thing is we want to make them think it's okay, right? That's not actually obviously true that that's what we should be at, right? That just because it represents a new medical development, it means that we should now have this as something that's everyone should be on board with, everyone should accept, and so on, and that there could be sane non-medical reasons to think that this is a bad thing that people should participate in, right? So I'll end with a final caution that it's a highly technologized thing, and as a result, it tends to be understood as something which is yet another banner carrier for what we should hope for as a society, the continuing creep of medical progress. So the role of ethics is to be able to reflect on whether or not we should accept that, whether or not we should accept what it presents itself as, and so on. So that'll be my final point, I think. I'll turn it over to Daniel.
Thanks, Marty. I appreciate Marty and Luz's comments there. The kind of summary statement that I want to make is we have a lot of data from quantitative surveys now. What we don't have, as I reiterated earlier, is kind of the why for some of that stuff, right? Marty, I think you got to that in your closing comments, is this why of why do people think the way that they do in regards to Xeno? Maybe it isn't a foregone conclusion that we need to advance this research. And if so, why not? What are those hindrances? And so that's a lot of the kind of current and future research that Luz and I are doing, is to try to understand some of those viewpoints more. And so, hopefully we'll get that out, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you. Thank you all three. This was a tantalizing conversation, reminding us of some of the hardest ethical questions related to research are sometimes not the most exciting, but you kept on bringing up considerations of distributive justice and really thinking about the ways in which we have to actually allow for people to respect people and honor their voices. I wanted to just let folks know who are in the audience that there are 2 other care panels planned for this semester. Next month is thinking about the ethics of big data, and the final month, or in November, I believe, or early December, is thinking about the ethics of conducting research in war contexts. So I hope that you can join us for those conversations. And I really thank the 3 of you for today's thought-provoking remarks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Good to talk to you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Dana.